Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. And in this episode, we are looking at the events in Sri Lanka, which have seen first a meltdown economically, then political protests, and the upheaval in many ways of many of the heavyweights of the Rajapaksa family who are blamed by the people of Sri Lanka for the mess the country currently is in. But is that really the case? And can it all be blamed only on the economic scenario in the post-pandemic world? Or is the China hand becoming too heavy for Sri Lanka to hold on to? And we have two experts who will help us understand the situation in Sri Lanka and the stakes for its neighbors, particularly India. We have Dipanjan Roy Chaudhary with us. Welcome on the show once again. He is the diplomatic and foreign affairs expert with the Economic Times. And we have Dr. Gulbeen Sultana of the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, who has earlier also been on our show on issues related with Sri Lanka. So welcome to both of you. And I'll start with you, Dr. Gulbeen. What would you, in all objectivity, attribute the situation in Sri Lanka to? Could we say it is the full responsibility of the Rajapaksa family, who seem to be at every level the most influential set of people in Sri Lanka, from the president to the prime minister, who's made a beeline now for a naval base somewhere, some people say in northern Sri Lanka, to the finance minister and other elements of the family who are controlling virtually all the important positions there. So can you blame it to them, or can you blame it to a whole lot of past wrongs which have now come to haunt the Rajapaksa family?
Thank you. I think there are two problems in Sri Lanka right now. One is economic and one is political. Now, when we talk about the problem started with the economic one, and when we talk about the economic problem, I mean, though the Rajapaksa administration is largely responsible, but Rajapaksa administration cannot be entirely blamed for the economic issues, because there are several issues which have been there for long. Since 1950s onwards, there are problems in the Sri Lankan economy, like trade deficit, balance of payment crisis. All those problems have been there, and I think none of the governments have addressed those problems, effectively. So those also have, impacted the current situation. Having said that, I would also like to mention the Rajapaksa administration has also to be blamed largely, because since 2019 onwards, there were signs of declining economy of Sri Lanka. Experts, economic experts, and then financial institutes like Fitch, Moody, everyone has been reporting that Sri Lankan economy in the coming days is going to be in crisis and all, but administration has totally ignored it, in fact, rubbished those reports and lying to the people that no, there are no problems at all. They continue to do so. In fact, even second half of 2021 itself, only it's in November when the foreign reserve declined to $1.2 billion, I think then they have started talking about the reality and all. So I think, and then there are some of the mismanagement of COVID situation, mismanaging the economic situation, and some of the, policy decisions which the Rajapaksa administration has taken. That is also largely responsible for this economic crisis. And the political problems, I will also say, because the political protests which are going on, asking Gotabaya Rajapaksa to resign. So right now, what is going on in the political arena, I would say that Rajapaksas are to be blamed for this political crisis.
Okay, so I'll come back to you on the local scenario there and the politics there. And there's a lot to be said. Dipanjan, she has outlined broadly that the reasons for the economic problems, and it wouldn't have come into the forefront of the newspapers and the television screens had it just been some protests against President Rajapaksa and the family on Galle Face Road, and on that part of Colombo, which is really the hangout for all visitors and tourists.
Absolutely.
Now, there are three things I think which people say are really behind it. One is that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, because his elder brother Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was the prime minister and has fled to the naval base, had done 2 tenures as president, so couldn't be elected a third time. So he made his younger brother president, who made his mark, apparently, as per some reports, for his very strong-handed policies as the defense secretary or the defense minister of Sri Lanka. And there are many allegations about some of his ways, where people have disappeared and opposition to his policies were met with a very strong hand. So that gave him the view that he was good enough to run the country. He could discipline the country, so he could run the country. And of course, his beautification of Sri Lanka's capital. But where he went wrong, people say, is one, giving into tax cuts to such an extent that there was virtually no money coming in to run the country. 2, he also adopted this whole organic farming process by which fertilizers were stopped and Sri Lanka's growth of adequate grain became a problem. And therefore the markets went through the roof with inflation because not enough foodstuff was there. And 3 is the debt trap to the Chinese. And that the Rajapaksa family, good or bad, has to bear much of the blame. And that's why their family home has been burnt off in Hambantota, which has become a Chinese township. Your views?
Right. I think Dr. Sultana and you were absolutely on the right trajectory. There are certain structural problems in the Sri Lankan economy. While Sri Lankan economy has been the best performing economy in South Asia for many decades. It was not just for a couple of years, it was for many decades. You know, when the British handed over the power to Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan freedom movement, it was largely, if you look at it, the Sri Lankan polity was controlled by the elites. All of them Western educated, very well versed with the governance, with matters of economy. You know, then comes the, the nationalist movement, which challenged Chandrika Kumaratunga's father, and he made the Sinhala only policy. But even in the 60s and the 70s, it had the best human development index in South Asia. And today I shudder to, imagine, I would have thought, Pakistan facing such a situation, Nepal facing such a situation, and probably Bangladesh at some point of time could have faced such a situation. But Sri Lanka coming to such a pass is absolutely unthinkable, because it never had a population explosion also, unlike all its neighbors. It has a manageable population, decent per capita income, and therefore also the protests are also because the locals have maintained the quality of life, which they could not maintain. That's one. And the tax withdrawal, the organic farming, the COVID, the mismanagement of the COVID, the way, because Sri Lanka lacked adequate hospitals to even address the COVID patients, and which was also very surprising, that because it had quite a decent healthcare system at some point of time, and therefore it could not attract tourists. While Maldives started attracting tourists from 2020 onwards, from the third quarter of the 2020, and Sri Lanka took almost 1.5 years to recover. By the time the tourists started arriving, there were hardly any pickup, and emergency was twice imposed. That also impacted the tourism industry, which is a mainstay of the economy. This compounded the economic problem to a large extent, and the team that the Rajapaksas had, they came back to power. They brought the same people who were with them earlier. Some of them are well, versed with running of the economy. But because of their political background and the baggage, they could not negotiate with the West And the West has also not been forthcoming in terms of investments in Sri Lanka, right? So in the last 1 year, to India's good fortune, deft diplomacy, very, the way Indian diplomacy has conducted itself in Sri Lanka, given our legacy in that part of the world and in that in island. I mean, Sri Lanka, India made a comeback of sorts in Sri Lanka. Started identifying sectors to boost the Sri Lankan economy. 8 sectors were identified by the Sri Lankan, and they wanted to link their or interconnect their economy to the Indian economy, starting from tourism to power to energy. And if you remember, the oil tanks in Trincomalee was finally come to light after 30 years. It started from
I'll interrupt there.
Yeah,
we're a bit short of time, but also there have been facts that when even projects with India were likely to come around, such as some of the projects on Colombo's waterfront,
right.
These were passed on to the Chinese despite an Indo-Japanese agreement with Sri Lanka. So there is the very, very big China hand, which is now playing out on Sri Lanka and also on the debt trap that they're caught up in. And Dr. Gulbeen can help us understand a bit of that, because I remember she had explained to us in an earlier show about, the oil storage reserves that we were negotiating with them for more than 7 years, if not 10 years, till finally Sri Lanka came around to giving us those oil tankers, which are places that were built by the British in the World War. So where is China in the entire equation, Dr. Sultana?
I think when we talk about debt, there's I think 109%, if you see Sri Lanka's debt to GDP ratio, it's I think right now 109%. And if you see go by the government figures, Sri Lankan government figures, they will always argue that the debt, China is not the largest contributor. It's basically the sovereign bonds, the multilateral institutes. They are the largest contributor of this debt burden to Sri Lanka. Having said that, I would like to mention that though Chinese debt contribution to Sri Lanka's debt is 10%, and official figure says even Japanese debt is 10%. The problem is that this 10%, when you compare with the Japanese or other bilateral creditors, problem with the Chinese loans is there are several hidden conditions. So whether this 10% debt, Chinese debt, is it a correct figure or not, that we don't know. So that is one problem. Second problem is that China, since I think post 2010, China has been providing loans for huge infrastructure projects. Now, when Sri Lanka, avail those facilities, it was expected that huge loans they have been availing from China, but when the projects are completed, they'll be able to earn profit, and from that profit, they will be able to, repay the debts. But that could not happen because most of the large infrastructure project that China invested, they could not earn any profit. Like you take the example of Hambantota Port, Matala International Airport, Lotus tower in Colombo, the cricket stadium, all the big projects where China has invested heavily. So I think that is also a major factor why Sri Lankan economy is in crisis today, because huge amount was invested, huge loan has been taken, which cannot produce any kind of profit or can contribute positively to Sri Lankan economy. So that is one factor I think China plays a major role in this crisis. And right now, I think when as one of the largest creditors, China should have come to the rescue of Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, China hasn't come. I mean, $2.4 billion China has provided, but large portion of it to repay the Chinese loan itself. I mean, there are some small amount of for humanitarian assistance for food packages and all. Other than that, China has not announced any amount to buy food or fuel or essential items. So that is
so that's very, very well put and very specific. I'll come back after a break to look at two other aspects. One is what could India do now, and can the new Prime Minister get Sri Lanka the bailout that he had at one occasion done so with the IMF. But that after a break. Welcome back. We are looking at Sri Lanka's plight and its predicament because of a combination of political decisions that remained questionable then and more so now, and because of certain economic policies that have brought Sri Lanka virtually to its knees economically, which has come as a big surprise to all of us. And we are continuing to have our two experts. And I go to Mr. Dipanjan Chaudhary. Dipanjan, I want you to explain how Sri Lanka hopes to bail itself out of this mess now. Both there is this talk of an IMF bailout, but I find it a bit difficult to digest, because is IMF just standing there to bail out every political mess that comes in front of it? Or there has to be some conditions in place. And Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, who seems to have come in once again as Prime Minister, has been in the news in Sri Lanka's modern history about 6 or 7 times for making attempts to be Prime Minister. His ultimate ambition is to be president, because Sri Lanka is a powerful presidential system. At this point, he doesn't have the political majority, but he seems to be fanning the crowds who are saying, go, Gota, go. So there are lots of issues there, but he, they say, could make his mark in history by getting the country to exit from the political and economic mess it is in now. Do you think so, and how?
Yeah, probably, Ranil was the best choice in the current circumstances, because he doesn't currently bring in any political heft. Political heft in the sense he did, he was one man. UNP won 1 seat and he lost the last election.
I know.
So they will. He has to form one national unity government. So Ranil is generally acceptable to all, including Rajapaksa. And he. People would be surprised to know that he had a good personal rapport with including with Mahinda Rajapaksa. And Ranil's acceptance is par excellence, not only in India. I mean, he had an excellent equation in India, but also with the West in particular. And therefore, getting a bailout from the IMF, which has been in talks, would be much more easier, not only because of Ranil, the way Ranil could handle the matters because of his understanding of the issues, but also his personal equations there. And they have more faith in Ranil than, I'm talking about the West, in whether to accept entire IMF conditions, because there have been countries in the past which haven't had a very, smooth landing after an IMF bailout. But they will definitely ask for some structural adjustments to the Sri Lankan economy. And but there is no option, because as Dr. Sultana was explaining, the Chinese were providing the loans to repay the loans, and they were offering actually more loans to repay their own loans, because they're only interested in that. They are not interested in any form of grant, and no soft loans. And Indian will play a big role in terms of the investments that India was planning, or Indian private sector was also planning. There were big firms, big private sector companies in India which were planning investments. I hope that they do not exit at this current moment and are guided by national interests, because in the past, the PSUs, when actually Mahinda Rajapaksa had offered New Delhi that India should help in modernizing the Hambantota port, the Indian PSUs involved in the shipbuilding and the port sector, they refuse. They say that it is not a profit-making venture. But everything in strategic affairs is not about profit-making, and you understand this better than many people.
No, I just want to add something, and I just want your yes or no to it.
Yeah.
Do you think that, as Dr. Sultana said, that Sri Lanka's economic slide had been taking place for a long time, though now the ghosts have come to haunt them completely. India put in more than $2 billion in Afghanistan.
3.5. Yeah.
Right? Now, that kind of money that we put into Afghanistan, my guess is on America's prodding that we'll have a seat at the high table. Neither was a high table given to us, given to us. And now it's all gone up in smoke with American
Right.
exit from Afghanistan.
Right.
Didn't we have the foresight to put money in countries in our neighborhood, Sri Lanka in particular, and Nepal, which again, America has now given them a $500 million bailout.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
where are all these institutions in India that help economic policy making? Where was their wisdom?
I mean, the government was definitely keen, as far as I understand, but I guess our private sector has been lagging in terms of, and we don't have the Chinese model. You know, if you look at China, you have 10 companies with who can have different nomenclature. For example, China Harbor to China Electric or China Railways, but they all can construct a port, for example, right? There are at least such things as well. We hardly have. I can only see one private sector company which is willing to undertake big construction and infrastructure projects in the neighborhood and beyond. We need more such companies, either from the PSU or from the private sector. But more and more private sector should come forward and engage or go beyond their service sector comfort zone and engage in infrastructure projects. And Sri Lankan infrastructure project, as you know, from the 80s have been battered. So Mahinda Rajapaksa comes in 2009. He initially seeks India's bailout. Indian PSUs were not interested. He turns to the Chinese, and China had helped him also to win the war. So the Chinese had a cakewalk there. And today we have this situation where, where probably the private sectors will be, I don't know, some of our, Indian companies are risk averse, and generally people will be risk averse. They would not like to, but I think from a Sri Lankan viewpoint, it is not an African, it's not a sub-Saharan economy, right? It is not even, it's not even a Central African, I'm just giving examples. It still has the strength, and investments, will give returns, in my opinion.
Okay, good. I share your optimism, but quite clearly our private sector doesn't. But Dr. Sultana, last question to you. Can you explain, and where would you put the blame on, where the mess has come about? Is it because, like everywhere else in so many other parts of the world, that you had family members ruling the roost in the country, and therefore them going in for all kind of economic initiatives to fill their coffers? Or can you blame it on the political rivalries within Sri Lanka, which led one side to show the other side in a way that eventually affected the economy? Or can you finally say that Sri Lanka was just banking on tourism to allow the state of holiday to continue in the country forever and not give them any other initiative? Because I visited that country many times. There are lots of tea plantations there. There are lots of other kind of, local agricultural products like rubber and various other things. Why is it that none of that seemed to be enough to bail them out?
I think the third point you mentioned about tourism and all, I would relate, because that's a policy decision taken by the political elites, the government, whichever is come in power. So that policy decision, lack of diversification and focusing only on one or two sector, that's, I think, policy blunder. And that is why I would put the blame on the, political elites, the political leaders, the rivalry. It is expected when the political parties, they will compete, there will be rivalry. But still, I think sometimes when they take a policy decision, I think in some way they have to think about the country's repercussions on economy and society and politics, because ultimately a bad decision, as we have seen now, though at one point of time post 2009 May, Rajapaksas were considered as hero, even that continued even in 2019 presidential elections.
Yes.
Now people are against him. So a bad policy decision will also have, even though it's taken for the political interest, it may have a negative repercussion on political future. So I think that's...
Yeah, so that's very true, actually. I just end on a bit of a sarcastic note. And I remember reading that their political standing was so high at one time, Mahinda Rajapaksa and gang, that even the Buddhist monks were virtually worshipping them because they seemed to do no wrong for Sri Lanka. But it's all gone terribly wrong. Let's see how soon the country can bail itself out of the crisis and how much would its good friend China help it now that China has been watching from the sidelines. Is there a possibility of another piece of real estate being sold to China for a bailout? But that is a question that time will answer. Thank you very much for your wisdom, and thanks for watching. Until our next episode, goodbye.